special guest, John Banmen, who I had the pleasure of meeting in 2018, and he was leading a workshop called The Fourth Birth. Is that right, John? Was it the fourth birth or the third birth?
Well, it was called a master class.
A master class, which I had the honor and privilege of attending. And John is a prominent trainer of the Satir Model, and he wrote this book, which I'm going to reference hopefully at some point. He's one of the co-authors of the Satir Model, and there's a lot of things that John and I could talk about. We had a lengthy conversation just a few weeks ago before this pandemic reached North America, and I think today what I'd like to do is to explore your own personal connection with Virginia Satir, the powerful lessons that you've learned, and also how you've extended her work beyond her life. And before we get into that, I wonder if you'd lead us in a meditation that will help people listening connect to themselves in a time of great disorder and chaos, and finding a way that we can more deeply connect to themselves and then potentially with one another. How does that sound to you?
Good. Yes.
Okay. I'll let you take it away.
So I would like to have the assumed audience, if you could sit down and make yourself comfortable and maybe close your eyes. And the first thing I would like you to take a look at is your breathing. So just be observant of it. Just be aware. You don't need to change it. Just be aware of your breathing. It could be shallow, it could be slow, it could be fast. Whatever it is, just acknowledge it. Then I would like to ask you to be aware of 3 different levels of your experience. The first one is, can you experience your body? What is your body experiencing right now? Is it cold? Is it warm? Is it relaxed? What is your body telling you right now? And just see if you could be aware. You can aware and accept. So from your body's awareness, I would ask you to be aware of your feelings. How do you feel right now? There could be some negative feelings. There could be a lot of positive feelings. But just to be aware of how you feel right now. And then thirdly, I'd like to ask you, can you watch your thoughts? What are you thinking about right now? They could be here. They could be thinking about the past. They could be thinking about what you need to do. Just be aware, accept, aware. And then just see if you can put those 3 questions together. And the question then would be, how do you experience yourself at this moment? What does your body say? What are your feelings? What are your thoughts? And then maybe we can change something. We can focus on something positive. And the positive thought I have is gratitude. Can you experience, think about, feel, and experience gratitude. That could have many areas of focus. You could be feeling gratitude towards life, could be gratitude towards others, and it could be gratitude for your own existence. But see if you can experience a level of gratitude. And then notice if you can see, what does your body say? What do your feelings experience? And what are your thoughts? When you feel your thoughts with gratitude. And with this sense of gratitude, I hope you can stay tuned and to listen to Tim and me talk a little about one of the great teachers of our time. So, if you're ready, come back and we'll chat about what happened with my experience and my application of the Satir model.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. So maybe we can start at the beginning point where your life intersected with Virginia. What was the first meeting like?
Yeah, actually, I met her luggage before I met her. But anyway, okay.
Her baggage.
Oh, she used to travel from one place to another, never went home, so she had a lot of luggage. Okay, so I met Virginia Satir in 1970, in January, in Brandon, Manitoba. And it was a 5-day residential workshop for professionals. For you, I might say that Maria Gamori and I were at the same workshop at January 1970.
Wow, okay.
Okay. Now, the interesting thing for me is I had just graduated in December with my doctorate in psychology.
Okay.
And so I met her the month after. Actually, the official graduation certificate says my graduation was in 1970. But anyway, I finished the defense, as you know, these kinds of things. I finished my defense in January.
Right.
My training had been very strict Rogerian. In Rogerian terms, at that time, I don't ask questions. You might tell people how they feel, but you don't ask questions.
You're talking about Carl Rogers and his reflective reflections.
So for me, it was a big, big shift. Virginia Satir would ask questions, and she would ask questions, even to the point where I say she's a descendant of Socrates, because Socrates, he maybe went around asking questions. Virginia Satir asked questions. It was such a big shift for me. It was memorable. That I still remember that big shift for me. That's how I met her. Spent 5 days with her, had a great time. She and I connected, I thought, really well.
How many people were at the training?
About 40.
40, okay.
Yeah.
And what was her reputation at the time? And that you...
90s, we had, most of us had never heard of her.
Okay.
So, but we had heard good things about her, but we hadn't heard, we never met her before. We hadn't really heard her before. There was a little group of people who were doing workshops at the time, and they organized this because one of the social workers had told us this would be a very good workshop leader.
Mhm.
So we in Manitoba didn't really know her.
Was the focus on family therapy, or what
Yeah,
was
it
the
was,
emphasis?
well, it was supposed to be family therapy.
Yeah.
That's, we were good because they were all professionals and it was supposed to be family therapy.
Mhm.
But as it turned out, in order to do family therapy, you have to be in a bigger state of consciousness. And so much of the focus was getting our own act together.
Okay.
So it was teaching family therapy by being experiential, working on our relationship, our family of origin, our internal process.
Mhm. And had you done that? I mean, when you talk about the line of that Socratic line of questioning, the exploration, was that new for you, exploring your own genogram and looking at your own
Yes,
personal
definitely. Yeah,
history?
very definitely. Very new to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it felt very good, but it was quite new, that the focus of learning was not an external kind of class. It was very, very much an internal process.
Mm-hmm. So you were each made to be the star, to focus on yourself.
Well, we would very often be the role player.
Mm-hmm.
She would do a lot of demonstration. And so most of us would probably be the role player
Okay.
in somebody else's family of origin. She would sculpt relationships, ma, pa, kid, and so forth, and have us look at from the so-called a dysfunctional communication to a more congruent communication. And
Mm-hmm.
what's in between, what had to change.
Mm-hmm. What did that first experience open up for you personally?
Well,
What did
it
that change?
changed my whole direction. Like I said to her after or during that time, I want to learn more about this. I want to be your student. I want to be this way. To me, it was like a conversion, I think, from what I had been learning to what
Yeah.
I was experiencing. So
Mm-hmm.
if I look at my master's degree at UBC, University of British Columbia, that was quite Adlerian. So I had some kind of uh, family system in my background,
Mm-hmm.
but in my doctorate, it was all Rogerian. So now here was a new teacher, a new person I could connect with and learn from and probably follow. I think the word follow would have been a good word at that time.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what were some of the things that you witnessed in that first 5-day training that inspired you, that made you see that what she was doing was maybe different than what you experienced
Well,
before?
yeah, I don't know. If I look at it, I think that what impressed me the most was change took place every minute.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a long kind of psychoanalytical kind of exploration. There was immediate change, and it was positively direction. People would make massive, what I thought, massive changes in terms of relationship with themselves and others. So the immediacy of change was probably one of the factors.
Mm.
I'm quite sure it was one of the factors.
Yeah.
Another one was that it had a very positive tone to it. That was in tune with Carl Rogers, kind
Mm-hmm.
of a humanistic
Right.
philosophy.
Right. I wonder if you could illustrate that for people who may have not. I've seen lots of tape. I've only seen tape, obviously, but she died in 1988, and I first encountered her work in 2007, I think. And so it was just all tape. But I wonder, and I saw those things. Those things came through in the tapes that they were fortunate enough to have. Can you illustrate maybe by examples of things you've seen or experienced, what was immediate and what kind of positive changes you witnessed?
Well, I think the word that I appreciate from her for a long time is she would make things experiential.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more than just a head understanding or an head exploration. She would go inside and make person experience what was going on. That to me was probably one of the highlights, and has been a highlight ever since, that her approach is experiential. You experience what you're working on. So when you are angry, you don't just talk about anger. You go into the experience, into your body, basically, and experience things. Then with her belief that people are by nature positive, you try to connect that positive energy to her, with her, so that you can experience yourself in a positive aspect, in a positive light. That there is a deeper self. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later. There's a deeper self. Can you connect with that deeper self? And then what is in the way for you to experience that? So there would be something in the way. Sometimes it's called expectations are in the way. I want it this way, but it can't be. Sometimes my thoughts are in the way. Sometimes my feelings are in the way. So how can I change my feelings, my perceptions, my expectation in such a way that I'm in tune with myself, which she called congruence. How can I be congruent with myself, take responsibility for that, and have a different experience of my life?
And I think, I mean, certainly a divergence from the more kind of blank slate psychoanalytic model that preceded her work. Her use of self was, I think, unique for the time. And I wonder, when you talk about that positive direction, how did you witness her using herself in a way that had that impact and had that allowed people to go into an experience quite deeply? What did you see in that?
I think two things, maybe there are more, but let me just give you two. One of them is she would be fully present. She would be right there. You would experience her. So later on, she talked sometimes making contact, but it was much more than making contact. Her presence, her energy was there. And then I think her belief, her real belief that we are precious, we're unique, we're lovable, and we can have a better, happier life.
Yeah. And I could see those things through the tapes that I saw. And I think that's what stood out to her, even through these, digitized or videotape things, that those beliefs that you're talking about were evident, and had such a powerful impact, because I think it then helped people reflect that in themselves or connect to that place in themselves, which you're calling, I think, the deep self.
See, she would talk about, sometimes she used this candle as one of her examples. And she would say, I'm going to help light your candle. But really, before she would help us light our candle, she would be a bright candle. She would bring her own bright candle into the relationship of her therapy. And that would help others to have faith, I hope, or belief that they also had that light and they can look forward. So it was a more positively directional approach, away from, I think, focusing everything on pathology.
From what you developed a personal relationship with her, I'm not sure, was it right at that point within that 5-day workshop that you developed a personal relation? Okay.
Yes, we've talked about it. Yes. The answer.
Yeah. And so from that point on, did you learn about her where she developed such a positive outlook, such a powerful presence of being with others? Was that something just inherent to her, or how did she get like that?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, I don't know, because I think she was really much more trained in the psychoanalytical context at the University of Chicago or wherever, and where she took her training. And it seemed like her teaching experience before that had really made her look at the human nature differently
Mm-hmm.
than they were teaching her at grad school. So I don't know. You know, we can say it was innate. She was gifted. It was all there, or she made her own journey without very little help from outside.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the time I met her in 1970, she was fully blossoming with her approach and her being.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great just to be with her, just to be in her presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's such a hopeful and positive, and you know, I've met you, I've met Maria Gamori, I've met many different people that were there training with her, Laura Dodson, Sharon Lotion. There's so many people that from the moment that they met her, exactly in the way that you're describing, it's like they changed their trajectory and became very inspired to train with her and to learn from her. And, you know, 50 years later are still passionate about sharing her work. So let's revisit the timeline, because we're still into the first 5 days.
Yeah.
What, I mean, if there's anything else about those 5 days in terms of your impression of her, what happens next in terms of your connection with
Well,
her?
okay. The next big thing was that the government of Manitoba hired Virginia Satir to come and train the whole country, the whole province. So in 1972, she came back to Manitoba for 3 months, and she worked everything from the cabinet, the premier and the cabinet, to everyday public. So she did public workshops, and she would do special training workshops with all the hospital administrators, with the doctors, with therapists. And so she spent 3 months in Manitoba in 1972.
What were people learning? What was the...
Well, what she was doing at that time mostly was what we could call my mini family reconstructions. She would have us work in a 3-generational exploration of impact and transformation, and how to deal with the person, how to deal with what was going on for them in the present, with impacts of the present. So much of the point, she would have a star. She would have a star, work with them as sort of a client, and then we would learn from it. You know, we would go, but most of our learning at that time was role playing. We would be involved in somebody else's family of origin, and we would take a look at how we became, basically it was like, we need to, the impact. Now when I look at, say, Bruce Lipton, what we're really look at, we wanted to change the environmental impact of our existence, so that we could change it at the energy level. See, at that time, maybe we didn't understand it or we didn't talk about it. But really, basically, what I see in retrospect is that she worked at energy level. So when you look at, we look at the information level, and then we look at process level, and then we look at meaning level, and then we look at energy level. So I can look at the Satir model at least at those 4 levels. And she would work much more at energy level. But at that time, she also said, if I talk too much about that, people will say I'm a little out of tune, wacky. And so she would try to phrase it in terms that were much more acceptable at the time. But now looking back, it was very much working at energy level.
Okay. Can you...
Sure if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I think when you talk about informational level, in the beginning part of her work, communication, her communication model was one aspect of it, and I think that's what you mean in terms of the informational, the process level, mm, meaning, the interpretive level, um, how we create meanings from what people are saying, and sort of taking those things apart and kind of reimagining them in a way where the the words and the affect are sort of separate. But when you're talking about energy, you're talking about something that's part of that, but maybe also quite distinct. So maybe you could describe it a little bit more so people can understand what you mean by energy.
Well, I mean, I can quote our genius, Albert Einstein, who says everything is energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about, I mean, I'm talking about that kind of level of understanding that all life is energy.
Mm-hmm.
So energy is, it is what is, so for the question is, what is human energy? And how can somebody be in touch with that human energy?
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of that, I feel is I have to be very much in touch with my own energy, positive energy that could start with awareness, could start with attitude, it could start with uh, with feelings, but deeper down there is a flow of it's so-called, I called, and they called it energy.
Mm-hmm.
So she called it later on, maybe at that time too, I don't remember, but she would talk a life energy. We are life energy. We are positive life energy. And we need to operate at that level. If we can operate it at that level, we will get in harmony with ourselves, with others, and with the universe.
Mm.
And go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna. This might be a bit of a leap, but obviously at this time where everyone's social distancing, we're in the sort of amidst this COVID pandemic. I wonder if you've been reflecting at all in connection to what you're just talking about the importance of energy, of being in touch with life energy, obviously that's very, very broad, but then our own unique human energy, and then our own contribution to the larger system in which we are a part. Um, I wonder if you could speak to that, because I think there's something very powerful in terms of how do we move from status quo, wherever we are now, a place where there's pain and chaos and confusion, in that positively directional way, which Virginia would want to work, right? That's part of her belief, and she embodied that. I wonder if you could speak to how what you're describing in terms of energy is relevant now, and maybe a place that we could generate some hope.
Well, I think the the first thing I would like people are but distancing themselves or isolating themselves. It seems like a lot of people are actually isolating. They're isolated from their environment, and so to me is to go inside. So how can people go inside and become aware of their thoughts, their feelings, and their expectation? Okay, so one of the things, like you remember, she had two books out called Meditations. So she has helped people through her so-called guided meditation to become more inside, so that you could become aware of it. She then sort of looks at, can we be aware of a deeper sense of life?
Mm-hmm.
So she says at one time or several times, okay, we are spirit in a human body.
Mm-hmm.
How can we connect with that spirit, that self? That self is a positive energy. And in relationship, in a dualistic kind of relationship, then you can connect with a higher self or a higher being or a higher energy that could be, some people call that God, some people could call that the universe, or some people call it the a being. And so she had this idea that there was a greater energy than we were, and maybe we can find a way of connecting with it. And it wouldn't have to be a personal kind of God, but it would be some kind of a universal energy. So one of the things that I saw her doing is, can you get in touch with that energy? Now, if I listen to people talking about in the healing the body, that the body has its capability of healing us. When I break an ankle, I can heal that. If I cut myself, my body heals that. Can we also heal the energy or the spirit of how we got damaged or broken? And she would say, yes, of course. That's what we would do. We would get to heal what has been broken.
Yeah, there's a as you talked about, there's a natural positive direction. When we get cut, the body knows how to heal. And when I was learning about family therapy and family systems through her model, she had a very different frame around what symptoms meant. That symptoms were describing a lack of homeostasis, and it was a symbolic of the pain, and to not overemphasize what's happening with that one individual who might be the problem child or the scapegoat, but to look at the larger system. And I think we're at a time right now where, we might formulate and think about the symptom of where we're sick and experiencing pain and how we're coping with it in a similar way. Because, she has that famous quote of, the problem isn't the problem is the coping with the problem. And I guess what I'd like to make a connection to is, we're all experiencing change, and I think a transformation is happening. And I wonder, from the things that you're experiencing early on and throughout your connection with her, I'm curious, you're talking about this positive energy, this life energy. What are ways that you learned and connected to that influenced your life and continues to influence your life that, we might bring into our inner world and into our mental states and into our relationships, that might benefit people now?
Well, let's see if we can find several points on this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my sense is that we would still first become aware of how we experience ourselves, not who we are. That gets a little too advanced. Just how do we experience ourselves? And very often we'll find out we experience ourselves in a fairly negative kind of way. We live either in the past or we live in the future, and we are not living very much in the present. So I want to have people become more aware of how they experience themselves. And then if I then would jump from that, then I want to say, now, how can I help you to be in charge of how you experience yourself? How can you take charge of your unmet expectation, your feeling, your attitude, your thoughts? How can you be in charge of it? So then it's just, okay, how can I then, in order to be in charge, I have to change. I have to look at change. And so how will I change it? So I'm going to help people, as if I were a trainer, I would try to help people to change their three aspects of it. Maybe a fourth one would be their behavior. But basically, we go inside and say, okay, I'm going to have a more positive attitude. I'm going to link myself to a higher or deeper energy. And now I'm going to change my attitude, my expectation, and my feelings. So how do I do that? One at a time. So I can find one of the easiest ways would be that I can elevate my feelings by raising them to a higher level of vibration. That would be, I will get in touch with, like I tried for people at the beginning of our interview, try to get in touch with gratitude
Mm.
at the experiential level. If I have, so I would change my feelings. Now let's look at an expectation. I have a certain expectation, something didn't happen that happened. Something happened that shouldn't have happened. I have an expectation. So if I had an expectation that wasn't met, I would react to it. So Satir had this beautiful teaching of, can you accept without liking?
Mm-hmm.
And we have a very hard time accepting things without liking. It is raining outside here. I don't like it, but I can accept it. It has no valence. It has no strength on me. I know it's there. I don't like it. I'm going to get wet if I go outside, but I can accept it. So we learn how to look at our unmet expectation, and we see if we can accept them, maybe let go of them, and find some new ones.
Mm.
And
Okay.
at the perception would be the same thing. I have some thoughts. This is how it should be. This is how it must be. And we would be more accepting. And I will now create new ideas for myself.
Mm-hmm. So I'm familiar. I think what you're referring to now is the metaphor of the iceberg, which are these different elements of experience. You're talking about feelings, perceptions, and expectations, which are some of the elements there. And I think within what you're describing, it sounds like being aware of what's taking place, that initial question you asked of how am I experiencing myself? What am I experiencing, period? Like what's in my consciousness, what's happening? And then you're describing connecting to an energy, perhaps an attitude that is more transcendent than that particular mode of being. So if the particular mode of being is, I don't like this, I'm annoyed, I'm irritated, some of the words that you used were acceptance. The word that you used in the meditation was gratitude. And I think these are, you could think of them as higher order energies or levels of thinking that transcend the individual. They're not just about you. Maybe you're also thinking about others, or you're also thinking about the context. And in those elements that Virginia talked about, I think that's maybe where the change can happen. It's you're describing a grounding in what is, and then using these transcendent energies like acceptance and gratitude as in like nature, a tree would use sun and rainwater and the nurturance of the ground to help transform those ingredients into something else. Does that fit in terms of what you're describing, this change?
Well, see, she has a basic sense of self that we haven't talked about. The self is kind of a natural energy that has basically yearnings. And so deeper down at the senses, we talk about people have yearnings, just like you said, a tree needs sun, water, earth, soil. We have also needs. People like Abraham Maslow called them needs. Satir thought needs were too negative, and so she called needs yearnings. And so we have basically innate yearnings, yearning to be alive, yearning to love, yearning to have meaning, yearning to have purpose, yearning to connect, to be validated. They're basic yearnings that we have in our nature, and those yearnings need to be met. And so we meet them at our experience level. So we have a yearning to be loved, and now in relationship, how do I get my love? Well, I need it from myself, I need it from others. So we try to meet our yearnings through our experience. And one of
Great.
the hopes that she had is that we would be responsible for meeting our own yearnings. And we would help children to meet their own yearnings. So the parents would help people meet their yearnings. And if they didn't, we could then get symptoms. And so the symptoms were just a manifestation of not meeting your yearnings.
Okay, there's a lot in what you're describing, and I want to hit on two things. One is this foundational belief that we're each responsible for meeting our own yearnings. And I remember seeing sessions where she would talk to people about, well, one thing is she would describe, she wouldn't sort of allow for this languaging of, you know, how did this person make you feel? And she would say something that sounded like, you know, what did you see that person do that then you created that feeling for yourself? And that we in terms of our own experience, we are generating our own experience. And when she was talking about happiness, she would say, you know, what does somebody do that you can take that in as a positive thing, that you can generate happiness for yourself? So I love that emphasis on responsibility, because it empowers us to be choice makers, which is, I know, is a big emphasis of the model. And then what you're describing in terms of yearnings is being, you know, I think of it as sort of the central nucleus of a molecule, that the nucleus gives information for the whole cell of what it's going to do. And the central yearnings connected to a deep sense of self are those roots. There's the foundational elements that instruct where we want to go. It's like our genetic code of what needs to happen, how that seed becomes a tree. And coming back to when you were describing what energy was, I think when you describe yearnings, that's a beautiful and concrete way of saying that's energy. When you're connected at the level of yearnings, these are seeds that are trying to manifest out into the world as something. What is your manifestation of connection? What is your manifestation of love? If you could connect at that point, you may be experiencing discomfort or dislike, but if you're functioning at that level, that's where transformation can happen. So that, I think that's a very hopeful message.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
So let's revisit our timeline, because I feel like what we're doing is, as we are going through this history, we're able to call out the ways that life has been impacted, the work that you've done, and we haven't even gotten to the work that you've done in the province of BC, creating the institute, which does a lot of the training for Virginia Satir's work, and then also a ton of the work that's in China, which is a huge part of how Virginia's work has been pushed forward. So I want us to try to get to those things today, if possible. But kind of staying with the timeline, we're into 1972. You're describing the work that you did in Manitoba across different levels of government and publicly. So can you carry us forth from there?
Well, okay. So a little personal part, after 1975, my jobs changed, and I became very involved with government functions in Manitoba. And so I lost a little contact with her. And then I decided, we came from British Columbia to Manitoba in 1965. And we've always wanted to go back home to British Columbia.
Okay.
And in 1979, we decided to come back to British Columbia. In between, I had gotten some pretty important, so-called important jobs, and I had moved out of counseling into administration. And so in 1979, we decided that we would take our children back to Vancouver to meet the grandparents that were still alive at the time. And so one of the things I always wanted to do was to be this big word, I wanted to be a professor. So I joined the university faculty of University of British Columbia.
Okay.
I'd had 3 degrees from there, so they knew me there, and they invited me to come and be an associate professor
Okay.
of psychology, counseling psychology.
Mm.
As soon as I got there, I reconnected with Virginia Satir.
Mm.
And she said, I'm doing a summer institute and come and join me.
That was 1979?
1979. So that was in 1980 in the summer. I joined her in Utah. And we had a 3-week workshop that we attended. Maria Gamora and I were both there at the time. And so what Virginia started doing is she would have what she called process communities.
Mm-hmm.
She would have 4-week process communities starting, I think, in 1981 in Colorado. And so I would be part of the faculty of her month-long from 1981 until the end of her life, actually beyond that. Mm-hmm. So for 8 years, I would go to Colorado and spend 4 weeks with her, being part of the facilitators of her group.
Okay, so these intensive 4-week residential, these are mostly therapists then? I imagine there's also some other professions that came to. And so you were one of the trainers that were there. My understanding is there would be like 90, 100 people there.
No, 90.
90.
Really 90. She wanted 90 people there.
To make triads. Is that why?
And then she would divide the group of 90 into 3 groups of 30 each. And then she would have a triad for each of the 30.
Mm-hmm. What did you learn? What did you experience and learn there with her? What that was different than when you first started in I think you first met her in 1970? Yeah, 1970. So 10 years later.
One of the things, I think I still learned a lot in terms of what she was doing, but she was doing it more in larger groups. Mm-hmm. So then it became like, now how can you train large groups? So we were very much taught how to operate in larger groups, how to take a group and make it an experiential training program for them to be, in the slang language of the day, how to help them to become more congruent. Mm-hmm. So then as a congruent person, you can then be anything. You could be a housewife, you could be a taxi driver, you could be a therapist, but you would be more congruent inside, and then you would build more positive relationships with others within the context. So she would put a lot of emphasis on self, other, and context to bring those 3 aspects into harmony. Mm-hmm. So
I'm going to ask you to describe, I will do my best to avoid using the word define because these are difficult things to really pin down. Congruent. Can you describe what you mean by congruent?
Well,
I know that could be a whole other thing that we get into, but just for the purpose of people understanding why, because you're emphasizing that as a central concept to her work, as a baseline for people to function well in any role. What is congruent?
I think it's slightly misunderstood in my opinion. So I want to give you my definition of congruence. To me, congruent is to be in harmony with your basic life energy. Okay. That you are in harmony with your basic life energy.
Yeah, I can get with that one. I think that fits with my way of thinking about it. Yeah.
So, and then once you're in harmony or in touch with that harmony, then you can try to get in tune, bring the rest of the stuff in tune. Mm-hmm. So if you're a little musical, if I can use the musical example, is if you want to have, if you go to an orchestra, a symphony orchestra, and the first violinist has the oboe play a note, note is called A, the note's the A. Everybody tries to tune their instrument in terms of that A.
Yes,
That
yeah.
A to me is the self. And
Beautiful.
so I
Yeah.
want to be in tune with that self. That it could be a universal self or a personal self, but she goes to the point for me, she goes to the point where there is a universal energy that we get to be in tune with. So congruence is being in tune with that universal self, be in tune and experience your own personal self, your energy, and then have your own experiences. That means feelings, perceptions, and expectations in tune, and then be in tune with somebody else.
Mm.
So congruence is to me a very deeper, it's a deeper kind of thing instead of just how do you feel. Be in tune with your feelings to me wouldn't be congruent
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
can be in tune with my anger, but that's not congruent.
Yeah. You know, there's this image that came to me within the first few months of my son's life. He's 3 years old now. And when I would walk into the daycare, I would carry a copy of the Tao Te Ching. Uh, and there was one particular verse in that where it described this imagery of a tree. And for me, what was so useful, it would describe how a person becomes undone when they try to attain everything. They want to express everything from the branches. And the image that came to me is how much we all can get into the trap of trying to achieve or try to acquire or attach to something through our branches, whether it's creating a wonderful work, whether it's producing good fruit, literally, or how the influence we can have as a parent with our children, teachers with students, the amount of money we can make, that there's all this kind of fruit that are material things that we're trying to attain for. And when what you're describing in terms of this connection to self, this harmony with the universal energy, what we're talking about as related to yearnings, when we have harmony with that, I envisioned that as like an alignment of a tree that's deeply rooted in the earth and really connected to something that then it grows from that place and can manifest something really quite beautiful because it's in harmony with that. When we try to attain for something, a reputation, material good, without that rooting, without that base, then I think that's where we experience disharmony or lack of congruence. So that's my image for describing what you're talking about. I wonder how that fits for you.
Good, yeah.
Mm.
You know, see, you say the tree is life, right?
Yeah.
We know the difference between a tree dead and a tree life. And
Yeah.
my sense is, okay, if a tree is alive, what is that life? That's the life energy of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And how can you as a human being be in touch with your own life energy so that we have a sense of who we really are?
Mm. Beautiful.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So this was a huge emphasis, and you had these 30-day intensives to work at that. How did that go?
Well, well, everybody, seemingly, everybody brought their garbage with them. So lots of stuff came out.
Mm-hmm.
So she would basically have the morning and work with the 90 people. And then in the afternoon, we in triads would work with our 30 people, and we would then make it more personal so that we could work with 30 people. And everybody basically would have their agenda that they would work with so that they could become what we have now called more congruent, that they would be more in charge, that they would be more positive, that they could have a different experience of who they are.
Mm-hmm. And
And
so
in
was
the evening, the groups, we would then divide the groups into, as what you said, 10 triads, and they practice in the evening with each. So we had 3 levels. One, her doing the total group, us doing 1/3 of the group, and then evenings people would work with their tribe.
How much was family of origin, genograms, how much was that early life exploration a part of that process?
Quite a bit, quite a bit. We did a lot of family of origin stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, one of the things that she contributed is what we call stances, right? We talk about placating, blaming, super reasonable, irrelevant. We would say, this is how you survive. You manifest your survival in a energy of sort of a coping energy, survival energy. And so we would very often try to take a look at a person. How are they dealing with their energy? Are we in the survival way? And how can we turn that survival into a more congruent way? And is what's in the way? So we would work on, okay, and people started using the concepts of triads a little unfairly, because they would go and say, I'm a blamer, I'm a super reasonable, I'm so-and-so, which was not her point. Her point was that these were at least 4 ways how we are working in survival when things are not in tune. Mm-hmm. And so very often we would use stances as a way of taking a look at how we are coping at this moment in relationship to others and relationship to ourselves, and how we could work through whatever got in the way so that we can flow more easily with the life energy. Mm. So there would be a work, a lot of work there. I mean, everybody was basically there, and they would be subject and object at the same time.
Yeah. I guess I have a question about the context, because I think in order for people to connect and to become aware of their survival coping, the context needs to be safe enough and nurturing enough to risk putting that out there. What did Virginia do and the team of people do to create a context where that was possible?
Good question. To me at that time, and I think it's probably still, it was her. She brought safety to the group. She would be, I guess one could say, she would be so loving, so caring, so curious, so accepting, that people were able to be that way. Now, I'm sure there were different degrees of that safety, but that was one of her earlier achievements right from the first day, how to make this safe for people to look inside and almost be publicly vulnerable in order to take a closer look at it. That to me was very much her energy.
Yeah, I've heard a friend of mine describe it as her energy was like that of the Great Mother, that in terms of attachment, in terms of developing a secure attachment, what you describe in terms of presence, attunement, validation, all those things, all those attachment needs that we all possess, she was able to provide that secure base, I think, with the people that she worked with, but then also the people work with in terms of families and clients, but then also with professionally. So I wonder for you, being around her energy, and she had such a presence and such a nurturing energy, how did that affect or impact you personally and professionally?
Well, I guess those are 2 questions. Personally, I would try to be more congruent, to take a look at what's happening and how I can let go of some of my childhood experiences, and see if I can come to tune to terms with them in terms of that. And then the other one would be the skill part. how can I learn how to do that aspect of it? So for a while there, it became very much skill based. We need to do this, we need to do that. What I think very often we wanted to look at a formula that would be there, like, you know, give us a recipe and we will follow it. And we would try to make it into kind of a recipe. And we found that that was very difficult. It had to be much deeper, come from within. So the idea that the two questions very often became one question, the question of how can I be and how can I apply what I'm learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there was a constant, I think, introspection at the experiential level. So that's why I think she called it process. We're in process. We're in constant process of taking a look and being in charge.
I love that, because I think you could differentiate it as in a recipe is like intellectually, what's the right form? What's the right linear pattern of what we're supposed to do here?
Yeah.
And as long as we're dealing with people, you're dealing with the unpredictable. And so maybe what's more transcendent to intellectualizing a psychological process, and maybe deeper than just a psychological process, is wisdom, right? Wisdom is maybe that which you can deal with the present moment flexibly. And maybe to kind of spark and transition us into this, where we're maybe going. When I was meditating this morning, I came upon a passage from the Tao Te Ching, and I was thinking about our conversation today. So maybe I can read that and see what it sparks for both of us. Would that be okay?
All right.
The masters of this ancient path are mysterious and profound. Their inner state baffles all inquiry. Their depths go beyond all knowing. Thus, despite every effort, we can only tell of their outer signs. Deliberate, as if treading over the stones of a winter brook. Watchful, as if meeting danger on all sides. Reverent, as if receiving an honored guest. Selfless, like a melting block of ice. Pure, like an uncarved block of wood. Accepting, like an open valley. Through the course of nature, muddy waters become clear. Through the unfolding of life, man reaches perfection. Through sustained activity, the supreme rest is naturally found. Those who have Tao want nothing else. Though seemingly empty, they are ever full. Though seemingly old, they are beyond the reach of birth and death. So does anything come up for you in hearing that?
Well, yes, but you know, the battle is my battle. I think somewhere you wanted to know where things are now. To me, the battle is that what Satir really taught was what you just read. But we're so focused on the psychological aspect, we miss that so-called spiritual part. And I think that that spiritual part, to me, is that life energy that I'm talking about. It is beyond thought. It is beyond our physical experience. It has a universal, a non-dualistic kind of component to it. And my sense is that if I look at her from that perspective, I see her working at the level that you just read. It's beyond one's emotional, mental capacity. And there's a whole different layer of life experience that she tapped and she manifested.
Yeah. How mysterious, but then also inspiring for all of us to even imagine a place. And I think when, you know, when we were talking about the kind of connection that she was able to make with people, and when you're describing your own personal connection, that it inspired you to move towards your own greater level of congruence. It's like, I think when we have that connection with someone, we can imagine that what we got from our parents was limited, and we can accept that more and be inspired to explore ourselves more in a different way, so we can transcend our survival coping, that which we learned to be and to develop within our family of origin, into something else. And I think for me, that's been what's been profound about her work. Um,
So
um,
what I think we're tapping now is, you know, what is the Satir model really about? You
mhm,
know, and I think we have, to me, it has very different levels. You can look at the level of communication. We're going to communicate at a more positive kind of energy, or we're going to change to the point where we will transform to the point where we will be more spirit, where we'll be more life energy, where
mhm,
we'll be more like your reading is be one,
mhm,
just to be one.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I love that idea that we are more than our temporal feelings and thoughts that occur. They're important to take care of, and they obviously affect us very deeply. But
Mm,
there's some aspect, there's some river that's flowing through us.
mm,
There's a life within us that's deeper than that, and that connects us all in some kind of way. We are each a unique manifestation of life energy, which is something that Virginia talked about.
mhm, mhm,
And to to reach forth into that place within us, to try to perceive that which exists in other people. And I think that's what was so profound in her work, because I saw her working in that way with other people. It felt inherently right and truthful for me. So when I worked with families and when I worked with kids, I would always try to do my best to see past behavior, to see past symptoms,
mhm.
and to try to connect and to make contact with that core worth, that core value. And for me, I think that whatever techniques emanate from that, that seems to be a central um, aspect of the process and of the work.
Yeah, and I think we're just beginning to unearth that part and
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, then there's different layers of application. One of my
Mm-hmm.
scholarly friends, when he read the book Satir Model that you have there, he said he responded to it in writing, and he said Satir Model is deceptively simple. Deceptively simple.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can teach and use Satir model in a very superficial kind of way, and it works. We can use it at a kind of therapeutic kind of way, and it works. And we can use it at a more deeper energetic or spiritual level, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to do more of the latter, to kind of acknowledge that the Satir model is much deeper than the everyday emotional therapeutic level.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that that's one of her major contribution.
Mm-hmm. So that gets me to one of my questions for today, which is, what is your hope for Virginia's work in the modern world and into the future? And you're starting to describe that, but yeah, what would you say in terms of the next generation, for people that are just learning about Virginia's work, for, yeah, for your students?
Well, see, I think, I don't know if we're doing it or we're not doing it, but I would like us to take the whole Satir model and take it out of just the concept of family therapy. I think Satir model is way beyond a family therapy model. It
Mm-hmm.
is a life model, how
Mm-hmm.
to be alive, how to be genuinely spiritually alive. So I would hope that we can take more and more of the Satir model into that deeper level of being. That would be my hope. And I think there are some people like you who are actually acknowledging and being aware of it and pursuing that. I think we don't have enough of them. When I see some of the people teaching the Satir model, it's at the functional level, which is good, but it's not really her major contribution.
Mm-hmm.
I think her major contribution is that we need to be not just to do, not just to feel, not just to think. We need to be, and that there is a life energy that is much deeper than we have given ourselves credit for.
Yeah, yeah. And I think when we're in touch with that level of being, the doing happens all on its own,
Yeah,
you know?
it just manifests
It,
itself.
it, and I know that's, yeah, that can sound, but imagine it like if someone tries to function from a place of, I just want to feel less depressed, or I want to feel, I want to feel happier. There's a superficiality to that of maybe you can use technique, or you can use medication, or you can, watch a television show, or you eat certainly. And so there's a superficial way of coping with that. But when we're talking about going within and connecting to a deep, authentic, alive level within yourself, which contains yearnings, that contains the potentials that are uniquely yours. And when you live from that place, Virginia created the seed model. When you imagine your life as a seed and you're nurturing that, it's going to be a unique manifestation. And then there's no stopping it. But if I'm functioning from just I want to just function at reducing symptoms without going beyond that, right? And I appreciate what you're saying, to think of this model as beyond therapy, beyond it enters into, well, how can we actualize and manifest ourselves at the highest level within the constraints of this life form, our bodies and the time that we have. And that's really exciting, to take it out, take it out and beyond the therapeutic context. I've been thinking about, we can think about the yearning for love. I do think there's a manifestation of skill sets that are important that we can learn, of what communication looks like, the kind of languaging, the concreteness of that are behavioral skills that are really important. And I think so both, the connection to this deep level self and yearnings, and then the skill acquisition of how I express that, how I express myself honestly to you, so that I do feel in harmony, I feel in alignment, and then risking that, not knowing what the outcome will be, and just trusting that process. Do you want to talk about beyond Virginia Satir's life and the work that you've been doing and have been engaged in with the Institute and with your work in China? Does that fit as something to talk about now?
Yeah.
Sure.
Now, I think I need to say that we had no idea that her life was coming to an end in 1988. There was no plan. There was not. She'd always talked about being around for a long time. She thought that we all had the capacity to live to 125 years old. And so she had no real plan. So when she died so suddenly, that left her organization. She had two organizations, but one of the organization was the professional one. It left us in pretty disarray. And so after she died, we didn't have a good grieving process, and we didn't have a good leadership process. Things started to disintegrate. And so a lot of her so-called senior faculty, the senior people, then would go on and do their own thing. And I had a triad, as you already know, of consisting of the authors of the book, Jane Gerber, Maria Gamori, and I. And we then started to go and do our own stuff. What had happened before Virginia, she had been asked to go to Hong Kong. during the summer institutes, we had at least 3, maybe more people from Hong Kong joining us in Colorado, and they wanted her to come. And she said no, she couldn't come, she wouldn't go, but she would send somebody else. And so the somebody else were Jane and Maria and I. So we went to Hong Kong, started working in Hong Kong. From there, we went to Taiwan, and we did some work in Taiwan. And then people from mainland China found out about us, and they asked us to come to China. And we did some work. I did some work there.
Which city in mainland China?
But that time was, I went to what they call Canton at the time, Guangzhou.
Yeah.
I went to Guangzhou to do a little work with the psychiatrists at the time. And then that kind of developed into larger things, because that was just the time that China was opening up to the West. Up to then, the major school in China had been psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis had come to China early on, before they had closed their doors to the outside. And so psychoanalysis was there. And so they were quite eager to take a look at what else is there. So they were eager to have the Western therapies to come. So we were invited, both Maria and I, we were invited to come to Beijing to do some work with the universities there. That's how it started with China.
So what was the reception like? What resonated, and how was it different than your experiences in Canada and in the U.S.?
Well, before that, I had already worked in all kinds of other countries. So from Hong Kong, went to Thailand. From Thailand, we went to Thailand, and from Thailand we went to Korea. From Korea to Malaysia to Singapore. So I had been working in those countries before we really took off in China. So one of the things that Chinese students were extremely eager. They were participating in Korea, for instance. If I wanted to volunteer, I would hardly get a volunteer. In China, if I wanted to volunteer, I would get a dozen before.
Oh, wow.
So they were very, very eager. And that was very appealing, I think, to us, that we had this very keen audience of people wanting to learn. And so it became a very attractive thing for us. And it was a very open opportunity for them, because they had had nothing before. So we were one of the first Western schools that came to China to work with them.
Mm-hmm. So was it historically and contextually that contributed to their eagerness, or was there something that you perceived in their experience of the model that fueled that eagerness?
Good question. Good.
What do you think it was?
Yeah, I'll give you my opinion. But we said that you have a self. That, to me, I think, was the main experience, that you are a self. You're not just a number. Like, we would go into a restaurant and you would see a waitress and she would have a 7-digit number. There was no name tag. There was a number tag. They were a number. And we came along and say, you are a person, you are an individual. So that, to me, was one of the major interests for them, that they were validated as individuals. Very different experience for them, and that they could go inside, so that they could regulate, they could experience, like you said before, they wouldn't have to look at how other people controlled them, like what other people expected them. They were really, some, you might say, we helped them ground themselves in themselves, in their behavior and their experience of themselves. I think that would be the major the component that I would pick as how they experienced us.
So politically, was that ever problematic or somewhat dangerous to be teaching such a concept, which I think, well, how was it in harmony or not in harmony with the political view at the time?
Good question, because it depends on how you look at it. Because if you look at it, we looked at it as you become more responsible. So we were actually training more responsible citizens for China, so that they would take greater responsibility for themselves, greater responsibility in their contribution. So for them, it had a politically good payoff in terms of using this idea of energizing them on behalf of providing service. So to them, it seemed like it wasn't any conflict.
Yeah, I think just superficially, when you take that idea of the self, and I wonder how it would have been translated in Chinese, there's the self, and then there's being selfish and being self-centered, and then there's the value of family in China and maintaining family harmony. And, you know, in my growing up, the family rules were, you know, you act out of duty for your family. You don't expect to be acknowledged or validated as an individual. Everything is for the unit, whether you're in a parenting role or a child role. So this idea of validation, the things that we're talking about in terms of the kind of presence that Virginia would have been giving people, I think would have been a very different experience to have that, to be validated as a self. So yeah, so how was that received? I guess it was received pretty well.
Yeah, it was pretty, but I think your point is, you know, they confuse it very often with selfish. What you're telling us to be selfish, and you're selfish kind of thing. And so we had to use metaphors like, you know, you can't help somebody unless you're able to, you know, be competent. You can't help somebody walking better if you can't walk. You can't do this further until. So we had to make out that you, the person, had to be more capable of being a helper than being totally ignored. And that being capable became your responsibility for doing it. And Satir model, of course, was considered family therapy. So the family aspect was a very strong component of them, to honor the family. So when we did family of origin, that was very meaningful for them.
Right.
To have them take a look at it, because that was honoring not just their parents, but their grandparents, or maybe even beyond.
Yeah.
So the 3-generational exploration of the Satir model became a very important part of them. And they liked it. They really kind of liked it. And then they could later on and learn about it. Okay, now how can you manage the impact and change the impact so that you can now live in the present. So family of origin was a very nice entry into their world.
Can you give me an example of a transformation where of things that you witnessed that were maybe generally common, of this transition from not identifying with the self to identifying a self? Like what would a transformation of a family rule be at the beginning and at the end of a process like that?
Well, let's see, that could be very complex. Let's take a look at, okay, we're going to start with awareness. We want to look at how you got to where you are. And not who you are. How did you get to where you are? And so we're going to take a look at your parents. Okay, we have looked at it. Now we look at parents in terms of a coping aspect of it. So we teach them how people cope. And coping to them was quite easy, to show them blaming, super reasonable, and so forth. So you would teach them how to look at how do relationships in the family cope with each other.
Mm.
in terms of that. And so most of the family relationships would be in a hierarchical level, and so there would be a lot of being in control at the top and being a placating, obeying at the level of this.
Yeah.
And so we would role play this, and most of them, this would be in terms of a sculpt.
Right.
And they really like sculpting. They're very visual, of course, as you know. So we would sculpt the various relationships and see how can you move the relationship from a, say, placating, blaming to a congruent kind of aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so congruent wouldn't be so selfish, it would be a lot healthier. So they could look at congruence, being healthy, being responsible without making it selfish.
I love that. Yeah. And I just, to illustrate for people that aren't aware, placating is, on one knee and on one foot and sort of crouched over it and smaller and, I'm always wrong, or I'm the victim, or you're always right. And blaming is one of the stances, is standing upright, very rigid, and pointing a finger. And I think this speaks to the universality of Virginia's work, where when you have that image and you're asking the question, what's healthy? Anyone could look at that and say, well, this is not a healthy dynamic. This is not a healthy way to be always down or to always be dominating. And so is that true? Is that the people perceive that pretty quickly as, yeah, as a parent, I don't want to be rigidly right like this and being locked into this position all the time. And then you could introduce the idea of congruence as maybe a healthier way of being.
Well, most of the point, when we sculpted, they would be the person, the IP in our sculpt would be the child.
Mm-hmm.
So we would say, we would bring together, we wouldn't take them into their present family, we would bring them into their family of origin, and
Right.
they would be the child. And very often then they would be placating their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would say how terrible it feels inside. What do you feel inside? What would you like to say? How do you experience that? And they would immediately be able to, at least seemed like that, they were immediately being able to go inside and express their feelings and their experience. And then, how would you like it to be? And then it's, okay, how would you like it to be? I want to stand up. I want to relate to them differently. And so what has to happen? And so then you can start at changing. What change has to happen?
Nice. Yeah. And it's the identification through an embodied experience of the sculpt. I'm placating. I'm not just talking about placating. I'm in that embodied form.
Yeah.
And from there, the amplification of that discomfort, and with the support of a guide and of a therapist to say, where would you like to be? Because that relationship is modeling that, and hopefully they're experiencing that equality of value. And Virginia often talked about wanting to encourage people to be on their own 2 feet, to stand on your own 2 feet. And another image that I have of that in terms of encouraging people is, imagine 2 people that don't know how to swim. How do they relate? You throw them in the deep end. What do they do? And oftentimes we can see relationships like that.
Yeah.
They grab onto one another and now they're both drowning. So we're trying to learn to both be competent swimmers, and that is that connection to yourself, being able to be responsible for yourself and to relate in a healthy way. And again, I guess I come back to we're all in a chaotic time with this need to be physically distant. But I think this is now a great time for us to relearn what it means to be in connection with one another. And I think this metaphor of, how can I really be on my own 2 feet? How can I be aware of these survival coping patterns? It's a great opportunity for that kind of learning, because I know Virginia talked a lot about how these are learnings and modelings that happen from our family of origins. We witnessed what we saw, and these are intergenerational things. But I think it's way deeper than that. This is millions and years of evolution, where these survival patterns you know, they're in human form, but fight, flight, and freeze, that we've taken on like social ways of enacting these things, of fighting, of arguing, of
Mm-hmm.
blaming, of being meek and giving in,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're so fundamentally a part of our lower instinctual aspects of our being, that but I do love her emphasis on teaching and of learning, that we can layer on new ways of learning that are really human in form. And yeah, so I guess whatever the culture is, we all have that opportunity. And this relates back to the work that you're doing, you know, in the West and in the East. So what else can you share about how people adapted this learning? Yeah.
Well, let me go a little further back. Let's see, what are we trying to do in China?
Mm-hmm.
Because some people say, okay, what are you doing? Why are you spending all your time and bringing all your colleagues there to help China? My goal is to impact 65 million Chinese to be happy, healthy, and successful.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a goal of providing a means of helping 65 million people to have. 65 million is, if you read the tipping point, is based on the tipping point formula to bring in a social kind of change. So in order to bring a social kind of change, we have to impact 65 million to be happy, healthy, and successful.
Mm-hmm.
Now in China, they have a government, as you all know. The government also has goals. I have 3 goals. They have 3 goals. So government goal, the premier, the chairman of the government has 3 goals. And his 3 goals, I can relate to those. I can tell you those, is security, prosperity, and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
In Chinese culture that I gather you're familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
happiness is a birthright. In the United States, happiness, it is a pursuing happiness is a birthright.
Mm-hmm.
In China, it's not a pursuing, it's a birthright to be happy. So I overlap with 1/3 of the government's goal. My goal is to be happy, healthy, and successful. They are happy, secure, and prosperous. So in one sense, I'm helping the government achieve its goal. So that sense, we have some connection with government, certain level of government, that they're saying, okay, the Satir model is actually coming here and giving us the tools to achieve our birthright.
Mm-hmm.
So part of our goal then is to do workshops that will help people to be happier. So that is maybe one reason the Satir model has been considered the most popular model in China at this moment.
Mm. So, can you describe what you mean by happiness? Um,
So let's use one word to be more congruent.
right. Yeah.
So being more congruent inside, more congruent in a relationship, more congruent in the context, in the culture in which you live.
Mm-hmm.
So congruence is then has at least a 3-prong kind of thing. Internal, you know. So that big phrase of Satir means peace within, that would be congruent, peace between, and peace among.
Mm.
So that to me would be a one picture of what I mean by being happy, is if you are in touch with your peace inside, peace between, and peace among.
Mm-hmm.
And that itself, they really like that, by the way, be peace within, peace between, and peace among. And so to
Mm.
me, happiness would be part of that.
Yeah, I think the word peace and of harmony, whether it's and I think starting with yourself and making yourself as healthy and as safe a person by owning and taking responsibility for yourself, then contributes to the contextual piece, the relational piece. And I've seen that over and over again in my work with people, with couples, with families, where when we learn this ability to go inside and to take that responsibility, it inevitably changes what happens on the outside.
Well, see, one of the other things that's culturally helpful, they have a sense of energy way more than we have. So the chi there's there, they know about energy. So when I talk about energy, in my kind of Einsteinian kind of thing, they have their own sense of energy. And so when I talk about life energy, they have a connection with that. So that brings model, teaching of my Satir model, to a closer connection with the historical aspect.
Right.
So I've had people actually saying, I understand my culture better now that I've learned the Satir model than ever before. So there is a connection and maybe even an overlap of how their culture, their philosophical culture is, and what we're teaching.
What does it enrich for people in China that they wouldn't have otherwise without the model? I wonder, what does it help manifest or develop for them?
Well, the thing that we bring into it that they don't have is experiential. They're tremendous good students. If I do a lecture, for instance, they can tell me next day all the things I said. They're absolutely super at learning by memorizing, by learning it. So for me to bring the whole life energy into an experience where they experience themselves is very new for a lot of them. And so a lot of them, they would, if they wanted to be what their system says, they would all be so-called super reasonable.
Right.
And for them to experience something beyond being super reasonable, making it experiential, is very very treasurable for them. So I can add something to what they already have. So they can understand what we have, but we want to experience what they are, and then how can they change their experience into a positive energy. I don't know, it makes all kinds of sense to me. I don't know if I'm getting it across, but
well, I'm trying to imagine, and I think where the complexity of Virginia Satir's work is, she didn't function just with emotions, or she didn't just work with behavior. She didn't work just with thoughts. She worked and didn't work just, with communication. She was working at all these various levels. And so when you're talking about congruence and the manifestation of that, it is a connection to a deep, let's say, yearning of something, for connection, for contribution, and what that looks like and what that feels like tangibly. What by the end point of what it's like to experience that through your fingertips and through your eyes, and to feel that between, and to trust that that's available to you. And I think in these workshops and these training experiences, if they can, and I imagine they do experience these things, because they keep coming and they're inspired, and I don't know how many thousands of people you've trained, but it seems like you're well on your way to your goal. But I think but I think for me, in the context of my own practice and working with people, it is a very different experience to get out of your head, get into your body, get into a connection where, okay, so I'm connected to my yearning for love. How can I communicate that just with my eyes? What is that? Can you try to do that? Right? And just forget all the garbage of the pattern of how you argue about the dishes or whatever it is, but to be here now, and to share that energy without the defense part of it. In my own circle and in my own wish, it's very much in alignment with yours to share this work, and to to create more possibilities for connecting to this universal life energy and finding ways to manifest it that feel truthful, that feel congruent as you're
Yeah.
describing. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, John, I wonder if I'm starting to feel a little bit tired myself.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
we can save more for our next conversation. But I want to thank you for all the work that you've done. Your connection beginning in 1970 and even beyond. I think of all the things that had to be in place for you to have that meeting with Virginia and to take your life course on this path, and for us to finally meet just a few years ago, and I think hopefully for us to continue to grow in our connection together, and for me to learn from you, and to contribute to the larger world in whatever way that we can through conversations like this. I thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you. Thank you. Good.